of all the things that I once loved. I'm writing down everything it means. We played our parts, we colored within the shapes and lines. A brand new start, leaving our fear and doubt behind. And I'm keeping my lungs, I'm holding my tongue this time. Oh, I'm keeping my lungs, I'm holding my tongue this time. Follow me to the sea. You're telling me there's so much more. Wait and see what it means. I'm telling you there's so much more than what you settled for. And I was wrong to ever believe that things would change, that suddenly all of my stars would rearrange. And in the end, all my excuses had run dry. 'Cause in my head, I was afraid to even try. And I'm keeping my lungs, I'm holding my tongue this time. Oh, I'm keeping my lungs, I'm holding my tongue this time. Follow me to the sea. You're telling me there's so much more. Wait and see what it means. I'm telling you there's so much more. What you settled for? Hush now, keep your head down, move fast, soon they'll find out. Keep your thoughts together, move fast now or never. Hush now, keep your head down, move fast, soon they'll find out. Keep your thoughts together, move fast now or never. Hush now, keep your head down, move fast, soon they'll find out. Keep your thoughts together, move fast now or never. Hush now, keep your head down, move fast, soon they'll find out. Keep your thoughts together, move fast now or never. Hush now, keep your head down, move fast, soon they'll find out. Keep your thoughts together, move fast now or never. Hush now, keep your head down, move fast, soon they'll find out. Hush now, keep your head down.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ray and Kate.
Good
Good afternoon,
afternoon.
good afternoon, everyone. We hope
Magandang gabi po.
everyone is healthy and safe wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us today on YA Other Than Dystopia and Young Love, one of the many online talks organized by the Ateneo de Manila University Press during this year's Manila International Online Book Fair. We are currently streaming live through the Ateneo University Press Facebook page and the Ateneo de Manila University YouTube channel. Please say hi if you are here tuning in with us today. Please also feel free to type in your location so that we'll know where you are watching from. And later on, you can type in your question. Once again, this event is organized by the Ateneo University Press during this year's MIBF online. Enjoy Ateneo Press's discounts and special bundle promos and add to cart on our store at www.manilabookfair.com. What to expect from this afternoon? We will have a conversation about YA, young adult fiction, with Rey Ventura. He is the editor of Made in Japan, Stories of Japanese Filipino Children. Kate Osias, author of Heroes, Villains, and Other Women. So this is her collection of short stories. And I'm the editor of Friend Zones, an anthology of stories for young adults. And those who can't join us today but are part of our bundle are the novelists. There's Patricia Laurel, who wrote The Pitan Schoolboy, and Emily Magtalas Rhodes, who wrote What It Means with Malaya. So these five are part of the YA Ateneo Press Fund. Please check these books out. So Emily Magtalas Rhodes, the novelist of What It Means to Be Malaya, sent in a video because she couldn't join us today. And this can serve as an introduction to herself, her book, as well as our conversation on young adult fiction. So we can begin with that.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I can't be there to join the discussion on young adult literature. I'm Emily Magtalas Rhodes, and this is my debut YA novel, What It Means to Be Malaya. It's published by Bukhaw, an imprint of Ateneo de Manila University Press. When I was a teenager, the books I gravitated to were coming of age narratives: The Catcher in the Rye, House on Mango Street, The Member of the Wedding. Yep, I still have all of them. They meant a lot to me because, one way or another, the protagonists in these books reflected what I was going through at that time. Like them, I was searching for my identity and my place in this world. Maybe this is why YA fiction is such a popular genre, not just with teenagers, but with readers of all ages. YA fiction captures that familiar sincerity, that earnestness of youth, and who couldn't relate to that? Although it's commonly associated with dystopian worlds and young romance, we all know that YA fiction is a lot more diverse than that. Themes can include history, politics, social issues, and speculative fiction, as we can see in the stories of my fellow Bukhaw authors. One of the things I've always liked about YA is that the stories are told in accessible language. It's not dumbed down, but it's not precious either. In my own novel, I explore the idea of freedom and privilege through the eyes of my protagonist Bunny, and in relation to Malaya, her childhood best friend and frenemy.
Okay, thank you, Emily. And if you're watching, hello. Um, uh, my friends, Ray and Kate. Emily mentioned some key phrases that we usually associate with young adult fiction. She mentioned something like coming of age and search for identity and a place in this world, and the sincerity and earnestness of youth. So these were some of the things that she mentioned in her video. And what do you think, Ray? Maybe you can talk about your book and connect with Emily's video.
Hello, marami pong salamat. Magandang gabi po. Okay, well, I'm Rey Ventura, and I'm the editor of this book. Okay, well, what Emily had just mentioned, okay, one of her themes is searching for identity. Well, this is exactly one of the central theme of this anthology, okay? There are 16 stories here, or 16 essays written by young adults. Okay? The youngest was 16, and the oldest at that time was 29. Well, I'm not 29 anymore. Okay, I don't belong to the YA category, but I think at heart I am still a YA. Um, well, um, these stories are basically stories of search, okay, searching for, okay, a missing father, uh, abandonment, separation, and uh, and identity. Okay, so these stories are basically written in a very spontaneous and very raw, or very fresh, and very honest. And I think that's one of the characters of a young adult story. Okay, they are devoid of theories, or they don't intellectualize too much. And I think that's one of the beauties of a young adult, yeah, a story written by young adults. Ano masasabi ni Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Osias. Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Cyan. So I'm Kate Osias. I'm an author of speculative fiction, and I tend to write about women. So this is my collection: heroes, villains, and other women. Uh, my friends Ray and have already mentioned about the importance of identity in YA, and that resonates a lot with me. My stories aren't always about young people. And if you look at the technical definition of YA, you would think that it is integral to have someone who's young as part of the protagonist. But my feeling, there's something else about YA that I feel crosses those boundaries or makes it easier for YA to also see other protagonists that are older. And that's about choice and agency. Because when you're young, you are looking to define your identity. And I feel that every choice that you make, especially when you're 17 or 18, every choice that you make is very important because it defines your future. You become, are you going to be a hero or a princess or a villain? Are you going to be in between? These choices, I feel, are important or very, very fascinating story prompts. And this goes even beyond, even in folklore or in myth. Red Riding Hood, will she fight the wolf? In Cinderella, will she run away from the prince? There are many choices, important choices that defines the narrative of a hero or a heroine. And I feel that's something that I also discuss a lot in my stories. And it's predominantly about women because the tendency of society is to
to kind of define women as black and white. It doesn't give you a lot of nuances. And I want to explore that you don't always have to be just a hero or just a villain. And I want to explore that choice and how that affects a person's identity and their story and their narrative.
Okay. I think I understand your story more in my collection, Kate. So I think I also wanted to introduce this collection. It's the oldest of the bunch, published in 2016, while Kate's and Ray's were published in 2018. Right? So Kate is part of this book. It's actually a collection of short stories by different authors, most of whom are my friends. And so I'm very proud to be called a friend because I admire these writers, and some of them are new friends. And I just want to go and mention all of them. Okay, so these short stories are written by Chinggay Labrador, Luis Catigba, Ines Bautista Yao, Emil Flores, Marla Mignano, Dean Alfar, Poppy Laudico, Gabby Lee, Kate Osias, Raisa Rivera Faldi, Nikki Alfar, Joseph Nasino, Jamie Bautista, and Dian Rosales Casona. These 14 writers are now my friends, and their short stories in this collection are a variety of different modes. So some are in the realist form, and others are in fantasy, horror, science fiction, and some stories draw on our history in our myths. So, is there young love in this collection? Is there dystopia? I think it's also important to mention that in our talk today, we're not saying we are no longer going to write about young love or dystopia. It's just that we also wanted to emphasize that there are other issues and themes that we can look at when we read young adult fiction. So in this case, in my collection, we were exploring the idea of friendship. So Emily was mentioning something about YA having accessible language. So I went back to the stories in this book, and I um, did notice that, or I feel that the language here is accessible and makes use actually of lingo that the young use, or at least use in the present past or recent past. Um, I hear an echo. Sorry, is it disturbing? Okay lang. Yeah. Okay. So friend zones, the friend zone, in its narrow definition, I think means or has something to do with young love or unrequited love, right? If you're in the friend zone, you are no longer a candidate of you can no longer be the romantic partner of the person who placed you there. But I think a broader definition would encompass other forms of friendship. It doesn't always have to be young love, right? Um, so uh, a broader definition would involve answering the question, who can we be friends with? We can be friends with our family members, cousins, relatives, our acquaintances and schoolmates, our classmates. We can become friends with strangers. And in one short story by Gabi Lee, her protagonist befriended an AI. And in Kate's short story, um, the young woman, I so admire your your young woman protagonist here. She befriends a strange creature who is a who then becomes, I think, her sort of pet. So we can be friends with our pets. But I'm also interested in Kate's um, protagonist here. She's a young woman and she's a datu. Was that, I wanted to ask Kate, was that fictionalized, Kate, or did we have in our historical past women datus?
There's a myth or a legend that we did, but there are no actual no reliable resources that says that we have. But what I do know is that pre colonialization, men and women, there were a lot. It was a more egalitarian society. So I would expect, or I had hoped that that there was a woman datu. But for me, it was more symbolic to make her a datu. I wanted to put her in a position where she's empowered to make a choice, and the choice of who you befriend is one of, I mean, it's exaggerated in my story. Obviously, it's speculative fiction and set in a reimagined Philippines. But the intention was, it was symbolic because she she was empowered. She had the power to choose who her friend was. The friend was a pet, as Cian mentioned, but the pet was evil. That's why the title of my short story is Small Evil. And that's also, I guess, it was symbolic of what you can do, how friends can influence you in an exaggerated manner, of course, but yet still giving the woman or the young protagonist the power of choice. And I think that's also important for in stories like Ray's stories, in the anthology edited. When someone wants to search for their father, that's an act of agency. And writing down their stories, or even just committing to writing down their stories, is also an act of agency for them. What do you think, Ray?
One of the themes, as I've mentioned, is search. Okay, so many of them were searching for their missing father. So, of course, that brings us the concept of agency. Okay, well, they're searching for something, and they might or might not be able to to find them. Okay, but one thing I would like to ask both of you is one of the things that I've discovered editing this book is that the writers themselves are okay, despite their suffering, despite their many struggles, they were able to move on or transcend that kind of suffering. So as I wrote in the blurb of this book, uh, yeah, yes, inspired by faith and powered by filial love, these writers, recount their journeys and struggles without the burden of anger, or bitterness. Uh, that's one thing I found. I discovered. And I was interested to ask Cyan about the writers in your book. Um, how was the situation?
So, well, these are fake. I think your writers were YA writers, right? Your situation is unique in that even the writers are young adults. Oh, I'm outing the age of my writers. My writers are young adults at heart, um, and they were writing fiction. Could they be writing also from their own experiences? They must have been channeling some of their own experiences as maybe young people or questing people. And yes, a lot of these stories do have um, suffering involved. You said suffering. There's in some stories here, there's bullying, right? Even depression and trigger warning, suicide.
Oh, right. Okay. What about Kate?
Yeah, I think my stories are not very happy. They tend to be on the at most hopeful. I guess that's the best way I could describe it. It's hard to write a happy story from a fiction writer's perspective. It's hard to convince someone that there's a happy ever after because we life is a little bit more complex than that. The tendency is, but what's important, I think, in my stories at least, I try to emphasize that the journey is as important or even more important than the destination. So suffering and sadness is part of it because it makes you stronger. Or in the case of a YA protagonist, it helps define the character. Whatever happens in your past or whatever happens in my stories, it helps define them. And whatever choice they make, it defines them. But whether the labels that they come up with are easy to access, that's different. We don't have to subscribe to certain labels as easily anyway. The point is to try to capture the nuances and the complexities of life as much as possible.
Are you conscious when you write of your audience?
I'll start. Yes, I am. I'm quite conscious of my audience, but I don't. The story comes first rather than the audience. But I'm quite conscious of the things that I shouldn't write. You know, more or less, like there's certain things that, for example, as much as I want to write or start writing more on queer experience, I'm very hesitant because I don't know enough about it. So I'm very respectful that that kind of audience will require uh, a certain truth, a certain thing that I insight that I may not be able to provide just because I don't have that experience or I haven't been with a lot of people who have that experience. So I'm conscious of that. I'm also conscious of things like if I'm gonna write about rape and I've done it in the past, there's a certain way that I have to be very conscious of how that's done because as you know, it's like trigger warning or there's a certain way that I need to be able to respect the experience and the trauma without just writing it for the sake of writing it. So in that sense, I'm very conscious. I'm conscious about how people see my choice. For example, if I write a woman who subscribes to the Catholic belief of of family planning or whatever, it has to be because of her character, and I'm conscious of how that's played out, as opposed to a woman who does not have to be Catholic in their beliefs and subscribes to either maybe a pro-choice stance. So those are things that I tend to be very conscious of, and then I try to be deliberate when I write them, and I try to be deliberate about the politics behind it. Ray, what about you?
Well, to be very honest, I've never I've never thought about my audience, okay, and well, specifically which demographic they belong to. You just write a story, okay, and hope that one day it will be published. And honestly, I've never thought about my audience. But when I started to edit this book, I suddenly had the idea of writing for an audience. And of course, I want young adults to write because, for instance, the writers here, only them could write their stories better than a journalist like me. So in conveying the tiny nuances of their life experience, it's only them who can do justice to that to that point, and a journalist could only approximate it. So that's one thing I discovered, and now during this pandemic, okay, I've been asking my students to write about their quarantine experiences, so quarantine stories, and probably that's another idea for a book. I want the young adults to write more. Thank you.
Yeah, I think as an editor, you feel responsible for your readers, but also responsible to your writers, the ones who are in your collection. Yeah. One thing I noticed about our books is that they have photographs or illustrations. So Kate's book has drawings by Andrew Drillon, right? And Ray's book and my book, they have photographs. Was that very deliberate also in when you were planning your book?
Okay,
Kate?
ladies first.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You were choppy a
Oh,
little.
sorry. I just noticed our books have illustrations, and Kate's, Ray's, and mine have photographs. Was that part of your choice for maybe for your audience or for your stories to have illustrations in your book, Kate?
Yes. Yes, it was because I had first of all, I wanted to have a particular look for the book. That was what I was after. And all of the illustrations in the book are women without their face shown. So that was one of the things that I wanted to show. Even in the in the front of the cover, yes. So somehow their face is always obscured, and it's obscured by their costume. It's obscured by their hood or their equipment, and that was intentional because I wanted to show two things. First, I want to say how we lose sight of the women based on what they're wearing or what they're carrying. We lose sight of the women there. But at the same time, I also, because it's so obscured and everything else is open, I wanted to emphasize that, in fact, there is a woman there. You just don't see it, and you have to read the story to go deeper. So because I had a particular vision and how the illustrations would go, it was kind of hard to look for it from a photograph in a photograph in particular because it's also speculative fiction. So they'll be, having to look for a photograph with someone with a sword and someone with various accoutrements. That's kind of tough. So I went with one of my best friends, Andrew Drillon, who was quite nice enough to do it, and he followed it. And in a way, I felt he caught the feeling of a woman who is not seen, and yet by the fact that she is not seen, there's an emphasis in her.
It is hard to look for photographs for speculative fiction. I wanted to show your the photograph here. Where is it? There. Oh. It's for Small Evil. We couldn't find your mythical creature, so we
Yes.
used off a photograph by one of the writers. So the photographs in my book, they're from the personal collections of the writers, or my last minute shots to fill in the art for the book. So it's become a little bit personal in that way also. The friends' stories and the friends' photographs are in this book.
I
What about
think Yeah, I mean, I think I see that. I remember that conversation when we had when Friend Zones was being fixed. I heard that call to look for photographs. I wish I could have offered, but at the time I'm not really a photographer. It was really hard. But before Ray, I just want to show. You just mentioned it. One of my favorite arts in the work was this one. I don't know if it's been seen. There you go. That's one of my favorite
Silang.
illustration. Yes, it's Silang, and the story is about Gabriela Silang, and I wanted to show her kneeling down, but still defiant. So there is a certain way her face is hidden, but there's a defiance in the way she's kneeling down. And I wanted to show that there's triumph even when you have been brought down and even if you're suffering. So that's one of my favorite illustrations in the book. Ray, what about you? What were the reasons for the artistic choices for your anthology?
Ray's
Well,
photograph.
the photos here are basically mine, and of course, the idea was brought up by Madame Karina, and I think I agreed with her that it's nice to put some pictures in between the pages. And I think since it's a very thin book, okay, putting some pictures would make it a little different, and I like it. And for YA, I think, of course, this generation they're very literate visually, and yeah, they're all very. There's a very high media literacy among young people, and putting pictures in books like this is really a welcome thing for them, I guess. Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I like this concept of yes, putting pictures in books. And of course, the pictures are basically just conceptual. Yes, and yeah, illustrative. Okay. I love
Visuals help
taking pictures.
tell the story. Yeah.
In a way, yes, I completely agree. Okay. Yes, and it gives a new dimension, I would say.
So Kate mentioned Gabriela Silang, right? And Ray, I guess there's some history also, Philippine history or Japan Philippine history in your book. What maybe you can speak to that, something about how history also plays a part in YA.
I think for fiction, and in particular for me, when I write fiction, you can't. No matter how weird my world might be, I might be in Mars, or I might be in a reimagined Philippines, or it could be somewhere else. My history, and in the end, my country's history will always find a way to get to come in and to reveal itself. The truth can't be this. It's harder to obfuscate the truth. I think there's a lot of it that's gonna come out. And if you want to talk about insight, I feel fiction, not just YA, all fiction, it has to provide a certain insight for it to be exciting, for it to be worth the paper that or the ink that you're gonna use, even if it's virtual. um, but the intention is to have an insight. What is it that you're trying to say with your story? What's the different opinion, or what is the different insight that you have? What is the and for me, to have that insight, you have to have that experience. And that's why my history comes into play, the history of a country. I write a lot of stories in pre-colonial and colonial Philippines, and you can see that there's a difference in the themes that you tackle. There's a lot of rebellion, and that's also part of my history or our history. But I also talk about fighting. There's a lot of fighting and anger. That's also part of our history as a country that was kind of mishmashed together and not necessarily not having a culture, one identity. That's also part of the stories that I write, and having that come out in my stories, I feel it gives it more truth. It gives it more meat. It feels a little bit more real, even though, as I said, it can get weird. I talk about a lot of things. There are flying steamships in my story. There's a lot of magic. Sometimes I'm in Mars. Sometimes I'm in the not so distant future. Sometimes in the very, very far past. But all of those, if you look down deep into the core of it, it's there's a lot of Filipino in it because I'm Filipino, and that's the truth that I live.
Ray?
Yeah, yes. Hi, thank you. And of course, one cannot, well, in a nonfiction book like this, okay, of course, history plays a very important role. For instance, okay, yes, most of the writers here, their mothers, okay, had come to Japan as Filipino entertainers. Okay, not all of them, but okay, many of them. Okay, and but the genesis of Filipino entertainers, okay, yes, they were called Japayuki-san, but the genesis of that word Japayuki-san came from Karayuki-san. Or karaoke means those who go to China, those who go to the Philippines. Japanese ladies going to China, going to the Philippines. This was during the war. So even in that context alone, okay, yes, a knowledge of history, okay, or contextualizing the stories is very important. So history, of course, is essential in telling, especially nonfiction stories, to give a kind of context.
I thought I'd bring up the other book in our bunch. I almost forgot that The Pitan Schoolboy is in the form of a memoir. It's fictionalized, but it's really also drawing from Philippine history. Patricia Laurel is a great grandniece of Jose Rizal. So it's a memoir of a young boy about being a pupil of Dr. Jose Rizal in the Pitan, where he put up a school. And it also has pictures, like this time, I guess, historical, real pictures. This one is the dam that Rizal built, and with his students. And this one, I was intrigued by this because it's the Kissing Rock. It's called the Kissing Rock, where I guess Jose Rizal and Josephine Bracken. Well, I don't know, that's back to young love. Just kidding. Okay, so that's the Pitan Schoolboy. Okay. So do you feel like when you're writing, do you feel like you're taking risks in your book, Ray?
Well, yes, of course. Well, not in this book. In my other books, okay, for instance, of course, in this book and right, okay, yeah, in this book, of course, writing is always a revelation. Okay, you have to reveal a part of yourself, and it's necessary when you want to illuminate or enlighten one specific aspect or one specific situation. And I take the courage to reveal something very delicate or very sensitive, even personally, sometimes, just to enlighten one specific situation. And yes, you take the risk, and that's part of being a writer.
For me, I think yes. I feel that I take a lot of risks in my writing. I'm not sure I take enough risks, but I I try to I try not to write things that I've already seen. So as much as possible. That's why when you had that call for friend zones, I wanted to write. Oh, what's a different kind of way to think about a friend? That was kind of like a challenge for me to think about it in that sense. And I didn't want to shy away from difficult topics. I also write not just YA. I also write young fiction, so literally children's fiction. And even in those, I try to write about death and bullying, and there's a depth to it because Um, I don't believe in restricting the type of writing just because of the age or even your target audience. Everybody, no matter how old, will probably have encountered death in some way. I'm not saying everybody is in all will have the same experience, but there is a 16-year-old there who probably seen violence, and there's probably a 7-year-old who has experienced death. So your stories will resonate with someone, and I want to write about those things that are a bit more difficult, I guess, to access. So that's why it's not just my stories aren't always. In fact, a lot of them are not about love, not about young love, and it's not about dystopia. It's about there's a wife who cooks her husband.
Oh my
um,
gosh.
there's a woman who a spell that becomes sentient and grows up, finds its own identity. So there are stories like that. There's stories of a queer quadruple, I guess. There are four of them in a relationship, and they went on and to take down the Spanish government. So there's a lot of things that I wanted to explore and try, and it can be sexual or violent or bitter. But again, the journey I think is important to resonate with a broad audience, not just an audience that it's easy to write for.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were sort of challenging yourself to. I can see that in your stories. They're all quite new. They have a perspective that I never uh,
Thank you.
ever thought of before, and I
Thank you.
think that's what I'm proud of. Or that's what interested me also in friend zones, because the writers here are known for particular things. Like um, Ines Bautista Yao, my friend, she's known as a young adult or chick lit writer, but in this book she wrote well, this parang giveaway ghost story. She wrote a ghost story, and her friends, whom she invited also to contribute, are well-known chick lit writers, but they did not write chick lit for this book. They experimented with form, like in the form of notes being passed in class, and then I was very surprised by Dean Alfar's short story. I was expecting another spectacular. Dean Alfar is so well known for his speculative fiction and magic realism, but he just wrote an honest to goodness coming of age realist story for friend zones, and I wow, the range of Dean Alfar. I'm a fan. I hope Dean's watching. He's like the Jungkook of writers. He can do everything. Yeah. Ray?
Well, Kate mentioned earlier about yeah, explaining about the complexities. Yes, I think I'd like to take on that point. Yes, yes. Of course, for instance, I've always wanted to explore the complexities of migration in this book. Okay, and migration has never been easy, but there are so many hidden aspects. Okay, of the phenomenon. Okay, that's not been written. Okay, and it took the children to these young adults to write about them, and that was really fascinating. And yes, and as an editor and as a writer, it has always been my objective to explore the complexities of a situation, of a phenomenon. Okay, yeah. So even I haven't written a fiction yet, but probably I'll do so in the future. Okay, and yeah, I'd like to explore the complexities of, well, if I may say, human existence. Kate?
No, it's fair, you know. There's a lot of things that you want to write about that's not well the not the less trod path. I guess I'm trying to recall what is the exact phrase. You know, you want to go for the path less traveled. There you go, the path less traveled.
The road
You want
less traveled. Yeah.
the road. There you go, the road less
Road.
traveled, and it was for me. And I guess it's a calling. A lot of people want to write from that perspective, something that they haven't seen or don't see as much as frequently. Because to be honest, there are no new stories. I mean, because the world has been alive for so long, but the way we write it, the flavor that we give it, that makes it unique, and the insight makes it unique. And the more complex the experience, the more satisfying the insight. So, I
Yeah. I think we have questions from our viewers. Here, what's this? Okay. Oh, I love the Friend Zones anthology. Thank you. Was it hard to put the anthology together? What's the back and forth process like between authors and editor when editing multiple works for one anthology? Gosh, I'm trying to remember how this all started. It was through a friend, Rika Balipata Santos. She forced me, no, just kidding. Okay, she asked me to compile something for Bughao, I think, the Bughao line for Ateneo Press. At that time, she was Ateneo Press director. And being insecure, my go-to friend was Luis Katigbak. So I went to him and I asked him, what sort of an anthology could we come up with that would be interesting to young adults? Because well, that was part of the directive, that we be very conscious of the audience, the young adults. And then Luis Katibak was also the first friend I asked, is this too badui to put as my title, Friend Zones, because I really like it. And he gave his approval. So obviously he was also the first person to submit a work. And then the process has to do with a call for submissions. So I wrote and begged all my friends. And I remember the funniest answer was from Sarge Lacuesta. Sorry, I don't think I have a story for you. I have never been friend zoned. Goodness. Okay. But so it is pretty fast collecting the short stories, because then the moment I started asking friends for their stories and sent out a general call for submissions, then my friends also told their friends, their writer friends, to submit. And I don't think anything got rejected. These are all the stories that were submitted, and I'm very glad. With that, because Ateneo Press asked me to compile these stories and make an anthology, I I did not have to look for a publisher, but I think that's part of the process for some. Yeah. What is it like for you, Ray? What was the back and forth process for Made in Japan?
Well, I think first uh, the job was on me. Okay, I had to collect the stories. I had to meet. I tried to meet the writers individually. I met half of them, and the rest I contacted on the phone and through Facebook chats. And once the manuscript was done, I just submitted it to Ateneo Press. So it was quite simple. So first I had to do the job, because it was my idea to collect the stories into a book.
I think we have another question. Okay, from Savindu. What kind of stories do you think the YA genre lacks today? I guess that assumes that we read the YA genre. To be able to answer that question, we would have to have a range, right? We would have to have read a range of YA. What do you read YA, Ray, Kate?
Just to give an idea of the YA, I mean, I've read some. I wouldn't say I have a very long list of YA stories, but I think what's missing is a lot of I mean, from an international market, is the diversity. They're starting. I think they're trying already. They're trying to have more diversity, but the vast majority of YA, especially in the speculative fiction front, still tend to be white or Western. We see a lot of fairies and vampires and werewolves and princesses and queens and kings. In a way, that it's the title of our talk. It's all about love, or it's a lot of it is about love and being a princess and having those ball gowns, or having magic in the Western way. I've seen some stories already to begin trying doing Middle Eastern magic. I've seen that Penguin is trying. I see Penguin already publishing stories in an international sense using Arabic magic. Cupcake, another Filipino author, just won a story, and he writes about the Mang Mabarang experience. So it's beginning. I think they're beginning to have diversity, but the vast majority is still very, very Western. Even that story that I read, where the YA protagonist was using Middle Eastern magic in a way, it was still rooted. It was, first of all, it was still written by a white woman, and then and then secondly, there was something about them that they were almost apologetic about the a person look. So the protagonist, even though Middle Eastern, had blue eyes, it, and then so what I've seen is a lot of the YA. I mean, I'm not saying all. A lot of them that I've read anyway. Even if you're talking about Middle Eastern and Asian, somehow they want to turn you Western. They give you blue eyes or lighter hair or lighter skin, and suddenly you've lost that identity that you're trying to find. A Filipino child or a Filipino teenager trying to find themselves in a story suddenly realize, oh, I have to have blue eyes to be special. So there's that kind of feeling that you're still not represented. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna talk just a little bit more on this, because I had this one is close to my heart. It's about language. A lot of especially if you write in English, of course, it's very different Filipino. I'm talking about English because, generally speaking, especially in the Philippines, when you talk about international markets, it's going to be English, English driven. And in English, when you write, there's a lot of politics in it. When you say fair, you mean white, right? When you're saying people who are dark is often already associated with being evil. So there's also that politics. So because you have so much to go up against, there's already you need more writers to start breaking down those boundaries, the boundaries of language, where white is almost always equated to goodness, where being dark is always almost equated to being evil, where we don't have ready descriptions to our skin color as Filipinos. I mean, are we tan? Are we coffee? Are we, I mean, are we dark? Are we, because we don't have that readily available, I think that also hurts being able to publish internationally for a YA audience and being able to represent us fairly. Fairly.
Okay. Oh, all right. Thanks, Kate. I think she answered it very well. Okay, you got an A.
Thanks.
A plus. Okay. I think we have another question. Let's see. Pao. Pao. It's Pao Tiansas. Hello. More of a fearless forecast type of question. Do you think the YA genre could eventually find its way into school curricula? Ooh. Awkward gaps. It's one of the awkward gaps. Okay. Mm. Well, I think that's one of the ways you can encourage more people to keep reading. Because if it's always just the required the required readings, it's one quick way to turn off a lot of resistant readers. That this is close to my heart. This question is close to my heart. I wish that there could be more YA assigned in grade school and high school before the classics. I've read an article on this written by a teacher that said that YA could be the bridge from for a reader who does not, for a student who does not like to read. So for example, if you're required a Shakespeare play like Romeo and Juliet, back to young love, maybe there could be a YA novel that could be assigned first before you take up Romeo and Juliet. So it could be the bridge before the classic. And that would be a wonderful thing for, like, what would be a good YA novel to read before the Nolly, Elfili, a Shakespeare play. There was something like To Kill a Mockingbird before To Kill a Mockingbird. Trying to remember the article, I can't. There. Oh, before 1984 and Brave New World, we read, what's that? The one with Katniss? Forgot that stuff. Hunger Games. Yeah.
I was going to.
There. Oh, Ray? Any thoughts?
In response to this question, okay, of course, one of my publishing dreams is for this book to be one of the readings in high school or college, because these are written by YAs for YAs. Okay, and yes, it's a dream. Okay, I'd like this book to be read by college students or high school students because they were written by young people, and it's about their lived experiences. So it's direct to their own. Yeah, yes, it's a direct experience. Okay. Yun lang po.
Ray, can you also call these personal essays?
Oh yes, definitely. They're all personal essays, and very personal stories. They're all lived experience.
Yeah.
And yes.
So it can be for for high school English classes and
Yes,
history
yes,
classes. Yeah.
yeah. It's a dream. It might come true.
Okay. For our last question, I think maybe I'd like to ask everyone to share their thoughts, final thoughts.
Ray, go
Ray,
Ray.
ikaw na lang, Ray.
Marami pong salamat. Marami pong salamat sa pagkakataon na ito. Okay. At naipakilala at naibahagi ang mm, kaunting karanasan. Okay. Yes, I'm not a YA, but I am a YA at heart. Salamat po ng marami.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for listening to us. I hope you do get to get the bundle if you haven't already. So stories here are very quite diverse. You can see we have historical fiction, we have essays, and we have speculative fiction. If you want to find out more about me or about the authors, please look at Ateneo Facebook. I'm also on Facebook. Please add me as a friend. Please, and if any one of you start asking me about the theme of my story and the symbolism for an essay, I'm sorry, I won't answer that. But I tend to overshare in Facebook, so see you there.
Wow. Kate. Kate has Facebook. I don't have Facebook. But thank you, everyone who sent their comments and questions. I think Alex, I know you, right? Alex Season, thank you for your question. Pao Chausas, hello. And Savindu Shil, Savindu S. Thank you very much for your questions and for taking part in YA other than Dystopia and Young Love. Again, all the YA books are included in the MIBF bundle. And I think you can see them on the screen right now. 5 books. Please grab your copy today. It's online. These are available at MIBF online at 30% off. There are more online talks organized by Ateneo University Press during the MIBF online. Check out the lineup of events by visiting their social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Ateneo Press. Thank you. Thanks, friends. Thank you, Ray
Salamat
and
po.
Bye.
Kate.
Thank you.